Hello, friend. Welcome back to CouchTales. Today we're exploring a fascinating psychological phenomenon. Why do we romanticize relationships after they're gone? I want to tell you about my friend, Joanie. Don't worry, I've changed some details to protect her privacy. But the psychological journey she's on is very real, and chances are you might recognize a bit of yourself in her story too. Some time ago, Joanie made the difficult decision to divorce her husband, Mark. The marriage had been troubled for years. Mark was emotionally distant, chronically unreliable with finances, and their communication had deteriorated to the point where they were essentially roommates, passing each other in the hallway. The divorce was messy but necessary. Afterward, Joanie did what many of us do post-breakup. She threw herself into rebuilding her life, new apartment, new friend group, even a new career direction. She was thriving. Then 3 months ago, the unimaginable happened. Mark died in a car accident. Even though they had been divorced for several years and barely spoke, Joanie was absolutely devastated. Not just in the normal, someone I used to care about has died way, but in an all-consuming, identity-altering way that surprised everyone, especially herself. Since hearing the news, Joanie has barely left her apartment. She's called in sick to work so many times her boss is concerned. She's canceled plans with friends until they've stopped asking. Her sister is worried because Joanie spends hours scrolling through old photos and family members' social media posts that mention Mark. When her best friend finally managed to get inside Joanie's apartment last week, she found something troubling. A shrine-like corner with wedding photos that Joanie had previously packed away, surrounded by candles and dried flowers. "I keep thinking about what could have been," Joanie told her friend through tears. "Maybe if I tried harder, been more patient, maybe he would still be alive." Her friend was shocked. "Joanie, do you remember why you left? He emptied your joint savings account twice. He forgot your birthday 3 years in a row. You were miserable." Joanie shook her head. "He wasn't that bad. He was just struggling. I should have helped him more." Overnight, Mark transformed Joanie's memory from a problematic ex-husband to a saintly figure who could do no wrong. The man she divorced for very legitimate reasons had been replaced by an idealized version that never existed. And just a reminder, this episode is for informational purposes only and not considered professional advice. Joanie's sister called me, concerned. "It's like she's grieving a person she never even knew. She's isolating herself completely. Last week, she told me she doesn't deserve to be happy because she's abandoned him. This isn't healthy." She shared a quote with me that had been on her mind. "What we feed will grow." It's such a simple but profound thought. Joanie is feeding her grief. Her romanticized memories, her guilt, and those emotions are growing to consume her entire life. Why would someone grieve so intensely for a relationship that wasn't even good while it existed? And more importantly, how can Joanie find her way back to a healthier perspective? Let's dive into the fascinating psychology behind this all-too-human tendency. Our famous Viennese mind explorer might attribute this to what he called the repetition compulsion, our unconscious tendency to replay and try to retroactively fix traumatic situations. Joanie couldn't fix Mark in real life, so she's trying to fix their relationship in her memory. Modern researchers have identified something called complicated grief, a persistent form of intense grief that doesn't follow the typical pattern of gradually decreasing over time. One key feature of complicated grief is idealization of the deceased, where all negative attributes are minimized or forgotten entirely. From an evolutionary standpoint, this behavior actually makes some sense. Our early ancestors lived in small, tight-knit communities. Social bonds were crucial for survival. The death of a community member, even a difficult one, represented a threat to the group's stability. our brains developed strong attachment systems that resist permanent disconnection, even when that disconnection might be rational. There's also a fascinating cognitive bias at play here called rosy retrospection, our tendency to remember the past as better than it actually was. We're motivated to view our past selves in ways that make our current selves feel better. Simply put, it's easier for Joanie's brain to believe, I left a wonderful man who needed me, than I made a healthy choice to leave a damaging relationship. The first narrative makes her feel needed and important. The second requires accepting the complicated reality that even necessary endings can be painful. Complicated feelings after an ex's death are incredibly common. One study shows that nearly 35% of people experience significant grief reactions to the death of an ex-partner, especially when the relationship was lengthy or produced children. Joanie needs gentle reality checking. Her sister or close friends might help her remember the relationship as it truly was, not to minimize her loss, but to prevent her from rewriting history in a way that keeps her stuck in guilt and what-ifs. Another clinical psychologist had a theory called balanced remembering. This involves consciously recalling both positive and difficult moments from the relationship to create a more integrated and realistic picture of what was lost. Joanie could benefit from what grief counselors call continuing bonds, finding healthy ways to maintain a connection to Mark without letting that connection dominate her life. Perhaps lighting a candle on his birthday or making a donation to a cause he cared about. Rituals that acknowledge the connection they shared without idealizing it. There's a beautiful concept in Japanese psychology called Morita therapy that might be especially helpful here. It suggests that instead of fighting our feelings, we acknowledge them and then act in constructive ways regardless. Joanie doesn't need to stop feeling sad about Mark's death to start re-engaging with her life. She can do both simultaneously. Some experts believe that Joanie's task isn't to get over Mark's death, but to find ways to honor the complex feelings it brings up while continuing to live a meaningful life. The human heart is remarkably resilient, but sometimes it needs a little help from our rational mind to keep it from getting lost in the stories we tell ourselves. With time, support, and gentle redirection, Joanie can find her way back to a new normal, one that honors both the difficulties and the genuine connections of her past relationship without letting them define her future. Because ultimately, romanticizing the past is like trying to drive forward while only looking in the rearview mirror. You might catch glimpses of where you've been, but you'll never clearly see where you're going. All right, that's it for today's episode of CouchTales. I'm your host. If you like this episode, please take a moment to follow, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and remember, our memories should be respected, but never at the expense of our present moment.